Should you move your snake to a separate enclosure before feeding? So this reptile myth series is getting pretty controversial about some of the topics we talk about. One of the most argued things that I see online is whether you should move a snake out of their usual enclosure into a separate enclosure or a tub or anything else before feeding, and then once they're done feeding, you wait a while and then move them back into their usual enclosure. People usually do this for two reasons. The first being if they don't want them to ingest their substrate, and the second reason being the worry that when you open your snake's enclosure to go feed it, if you were to feed it in its usual enclosure, then it would associate that enclosure opening and you going in to maybe just pick up the snake or something with actually feeding the snake. So this doesn't really make very much sense, and I would say it's way better to always avoid moving them from their enclosure when you're about to feed. So this is Gobi, my corn snake. He's going to be helping me out a bit. And first I'm just going to talk a little bit about feeding your snake. So usually what I suggest, and what a lot of other people suggest to do, is to feed your snake and then wait about 1 day, maybe 2 days, to ensure that they've digested enough to where they're not going to get stressed out when you mess with them again. If you do mess with them again and they get really freaked out, they can potentially vomit or regurgitate their meal that they ate. Snakes are going to do this in the wild because they're going to have trouble moving around and defending themselves if they have some sort of huge meal inside them. The problem is not only are you wasting a mouse or rat when your snake regurgitates, but on top of that, it can be pretty dangerous. Because their meals are so huge and can make up such a large part of their body mass at the time, it's just really going to take a lot of energy. It's just going to be really uncomfortable, and it can potentially be dangerous because some snakes also just have really delicate stomachs, and it can be easy to potentially damage that stomach when they're vomiting that food back up. So let's say I take my snake out to feed it. I'll put it in the feeding tub. Okay. This feeding tub's not going to work because it's too small, but luckily I'm not actually feeding him in it. Say I have him in here for a few minutes so he can settle down, then I give him the mouse or rat. Then once he's eaten, I wait a little while to move him back into the enclosure. Now the problem is most people say you should wait 1 to 2 days, but keeping your snake in this little tub for 1 to 2 days that doesn't have any of their necessities, like not necessarily any water or heating or proper hiding places, they're just going to be stuck in this little uncomfortable tub while they have to digest, and that can potentially make them more stressed. If I decide not to wait and just go ahead and take the snake out anywhere from like 5 minutes to a couple hours after feeding, because the snake will be fine in there for that long, you're going to come in and pick this snake up, but it's going to have a meal in there. And although it might be completely comfortable with you, they're always less comfortable when they're full. So me picking him up right here is a potential time for him to vomit up his food. So maybe you decide to move it to an enclosure, but you do wait 1 to 2 days to feed it. Again, it's not going to have those necessities, but maybe you even built like a whole second enclosure just for feeding so that it will be more comfortable. That would be kind of a lot of money to put into a second enclosure. However, this could potentially reduce the risk of them biting when they're in their usual enclosure. Well, that doesn't really make sense because now they're in their feeding enclosure. No matter what it is, when you come back a while later to pick them up, they're probably going to associate this with their feeding thing as you want them to instead of their normal enclosure. But now you're just going to come back in and pick them up and, well, actually pick them out of it, but they're in their feeding enclosure. They're supposed to associate this with eating. That means you're probably just going to get bit when you're taking your snake back out from the actual feeding bin or enclosure into their normal home. So for that reason, it doesn't really make sense to me. But there are other things that we can talk about. The next being that risk of them eating their substrate. That can be a concern because certain substrates will impact your animal. And if they say eat their mouse and then drop it in their substrate and substrate like sticks to it, then they could potentially ingest all of that. Well, if you've chosen a good substrate, you don't need to worry about this. And if you have an actual dry mouse, even if you did thaw it out in water, you can just wipe it off and it really shouldn't pick up much substrate. And most substrates are going to be just fine for snakes to ingest a couple little pieces here and there because they can actually digest different things like wood or paper. Now, you don't just deliberately want them to eat this, but a couple little pieces stuck to them isn't going to be a problem unless you are using a substrate like sand or calci sand or walnut shells. And these are actually a bunch of substrates I talked about in another video. which are some of the worst substrate choices, so you can go watch that. But basically that eliminates your second concern, being them ingesting the substrate, because it's not that big of a deal and you can avoid most of the pieces. So finally, possibly the most important part, so hopefully you're still watching before commenting, but that is, I'm pretty sure food aggression doesn't exist. I have 4 snakes right now. I've had the longest for 3 years, and they've never showed any food aggression. I have been bit by my ball python Sunny when feeding him, but that's because I have that mouse scent on my hands. If I stick that mouse in there and I decide like not to use tongs or anything, he might just go past the mouse and go for my hand instead. However, if I have no mouse scent on my hands and it's just a usual day, and I go into that enclosure, I never have any issues. Snakes are always going to investigate before just randomly trying to bite their food. If it is just your hand with no mouse on it, they're just going to pick up those not so tasty human pheromones and they're not going to try and eat you. I guess they could always bite you if they're feeling extra defensible, but that's not going to be related at all to where you feed your snake. A lot of people agree online that there's really no evidence of this actually happening because it really doesn't make sense anyway. But these are the reasons that I highly suggest that you never move your snake when you're about to feed it. Even if you do have that worry of substrate, just make sure it's a substrate that they won't have a problem ingesting, and make sure that you're actually drying that mouse or rat off before feeding. But let me know what you think about this and what you've heard of it. Let me know if you found any other sources that have actually said anything otherwise with some good evidence. But that'll be it for this Reptile Myths episode. So hopefully it helped out a bit. I'm Alex, and thanks for watching.